William Peter Blatty adapted his own novel Legion and created something most people never saw. That wasn't until 2016 when they found his director's cut buried in a vault. Blatty's source novel, it has brilliant ideas, but they're all drowning in amateur philosophy. The man wrote what should have been a tight supernatural thriller, then decided every chapter needed Kinderman's extended internal monologues about theology, evolution, and the nature of evil. The book reads like Blatty got paid by the philosophical tangent, just page after page of Kinderman wondering about God's plan. And at times, it feels like undergraduate religious studies. While good horror often includes meditations, it ultimately needs momentum to propel the story forward. Blatty the director understood what Blatty the novelist didn't. And when adapting his own work, he cut out all of the philosophical masturbation and focused on what worked. We have the investigation, the characters, and the growing supernatural dread. The director's cut eliminates the novel's biggest weakness: its tendency to substitute theological lectures for actual storytelling. Where the book stops for Kinderman to ponder existence, the film shows us his character through actions and reactions. Brad Dourif's performance as the Gemini Killer, it alone justifies this adaptation's existence.
Is the torment of your friend Father Karras as he watches while I rip and cut and mutilate the innocent, his friends, again and again and on and on. He is inside with us. He will never get away. His pain won't end.
And George C. Scott's Kinderman benefits enormously from the visual approach. When Kinderman realizes the Gemini Killer is targeting his daughter and then runs to that police car, that's character development through action, not exposition. And then that hospital hallway scene, that's cinematic terror at its purest. The film builds spatial comfort, then violates it completely. The director's cut proves something important about artistic vision versus commercial compromise. Blatty understood that adapting his own work meant being ruthless about what serves the story, versus what served his ego as a novelist. Adam Nevill, he wrote what should have been a masterpiece of folk horror. Then halfway through, decided to turn it into a black metal fever dream about teenage cultists called Blood Frenzy. I shit you not. Blood Frenzy. Now, Netflix has been known to take solid material and turn it into dog shit. But with this one, they took one look at this novel and they said, hold my beer. For the first 100 pages, the ritual is genuinely terrifying. Nevill knows how to write atmosphere. Those ancient Swedish woods, the creeping dread, and the way civilization just disappears. You're reading about these four middle-aged friends on a hiking trip that just happens to go wrong. And you can feel the weight of those trees pressing down on you. Then you hit the halfway point. And apparently Nevill thinks, you know what this sophisticated folk horror needs? Teenagers with face paint performing pagan rituals. It's like being served a perfect wine pairing, and then the waiter brings you Cheetos as the main course. Our protagonists, they escape the ancient forest evil only to stumble into a house full of metalheads who worship the thing. These aren't ancient cultists preserving forbidden knowledge. They're basically what would happen if Hot Topic had a pagan studies section. The book, it literally goes from primal existential terror to just, oh no, the goths are chanting again. David Bruckner, he read this and made the smartest decision in adaptation history. He just absolutely destroyed the second half. Gone. Vanished. Instead, he gave us what the book should have been all along. A tight, focused story about guilt, friendship, and ancient evil. But here's where Bruckner really showed his genius. That opening scene where Rob gets murdered during the convenience store robbery, that's not in the book. In Neville's version, Luke is just some underachiever whose friends are trying to help him get some fresh air. It sounds like an oxymoron, but Bruckner understood that trauma needs to be specific to be universal. Luke's cowardice during Rob's murder, where he's watching his friend die while hiding behind a shelf, that's the kind of guilt that follows you into the woods. The film keeps cutting between that convenience store and the forest. And every time Luke hears that creature calling, we understand exactly why he wants to give in. And we have to talk about Motor, whatever the creature's name is in this story. In the book, Nevill describes it as goat-like with human arms, which, thanks, Adam. It really paints a picture. The film creates this genuinely disturbing elk-human nightmare hybrid thing that it crawls into your dreams. The VFX team, they built something that looks like it evolved specifically to hunt humans who they've wandered too far from Wi-Fi signals into these ancient woods. In the book, Luke defeats this ancient forest god with a pocket knife in a van collision. Seriously. The movie, it gives us something that actually resonates. Luke has to literally refuse to kneel before his demons, both supernatural and psychological. When he roars defiance at the creature before escaping the forest, it's not just survival horror. It's the psychological catharsis this novel needed. Tony Burgess wrote Pontypool Changes Everything. And if you haven't read it, you should because it's interesting. But that's kind of where it stops. You should also know that it's a book that's it's so chaotic and unreadable that even Burgess himself admitted that it never should have been read in the first place. And then he adapted it for film. And he proved something beautiful. Sometimes you have to kill your darlings to save your story. The premise sounds incredible. A zombie virus that spreads throughout language itself. Words become weapons. Communication becomes contagion. The English language turns against its own speakers. What could go wrong? Well, everything apparently. The book reads like the fever dream of someone having a complete psychotic break. Burgess literally named 3 characters, Helen, Ellen, and capital H/Helen, or Ellen. But here's where it gets really painful. Burgess decided to recreate the linguistic virus in his own prose. Pages of intentionally fragmented, nonsensical text that's supposed to mirror the infection. It's experimental fiction at its most masturbatory. The book jumps between multiple storylines across Ontario, with all the narrative coherence of a toddler telling you about their dreams. Just 2/3 through the book, I was exhausted. Then Bruce McDonald, he directed it, and it created something extraordinary from this literary wreckage. McDonald looked at what this sprawling mess was and said, what if we put Grant Mazzy in a basement radio station? And he never left. It was genius. Instead of following a dozen characters across half of Canada, we get 3 people, 1 room, and mounting dread. Stephen McHattie's voice becomes the entire movie. That deep, throaty radio DJ delivery that it could make a grocery list sound ominous. The movie turns the concept's weakness into its greatest strength. And here's the thing. We never see the chaos. We only hear fragmentary reports. Your imagination fills in the blanks because your imagination is usually worse. And the film creates genuine tension around the act of communication itself. Because these people, they're professional communicators, and their greatest skill becomes their greatest liability. Meanwhile, the book is having an intellectual seizure on the page. See, Bruce McDonald took Burgess's fascinating premise and built an actual story around it. He understood that the concept was brilliant. It just needed to be executed by people who remembered that audiences exist. Stephen King publicly admitted that Frank Darabont's ending was better than his own. When the king of horror bows to you and admits he got schooled, you gotta pay attention. At times, and I love him for it, but King believes in redemption, and it's almost a flaw. He thinks people are fundamentally good, and that love conquers all, and that there's usually a way through the darkness. Most of the time, that's what makes his work beautiful. But sometimes horror needs to just grab you by the throat and remind you that the universe does not give a single shit about your happy ending. King's novella ends with David Drayton and his crew driving into the mist. They hear a faint radio signal, and it suggests that maybe there's hope. It's literary, ambiguous, and completely wrong for this story. You just would have never known it if the movie didn't exist. Darabont gave us the most gut-wrenching finale in horror cinema history. David mercy kills his companions, including his own son, with his very last bullets. Then he sits there and waits for the creatures. 60 seconds later, the military rolls up, the mist clears, and David realizes he just murdered everyone he was trying to save. It's cosmically cruel and absolutely perfect. King himself said of the ending that it was so anti-everything, and he liked it. Take Mrs. Carmody. In the book, she's just your standard religious fanatic. Marcia Gay Harden takes that character and creates something genuinely terrifying.
You heard him. It is these people who brought this upon us. They, people who refuse to bend to the will of God.
Her Mrs. Carmody, she embodies how fear transforms ordinary people into monsters. You watch her gradually corrupt the other survivors, and it's more frightening than anything lurking in the mist. The film also benefits from immediate visual impact. Darabont, he shoots the grocery store like a pressure cooker just about to explode at any given moment. You can see the social order breaking down in real time. It's like Lord of the Flies in a supermarket. King's ending asks, what if there's hope? Darabont asked, what if hope is the cruelest joke the universe can play on you? Mike Flanagan did the impossible. He made a Stephen King sequel that works as both a book adaptation and as a sequel to Kubrick's The Shining, the film King famously hates. It's like writing a song that works as both jazz and death metal. King's Dr. Sleep, it reads like he was settling scores instead of telling a story. I love the novel. I mean, it's sitting right up there. But the man spent 30 years nursing a grudge against Kubrick's interpretation, and it shows. The book goes out of its way to contradict the film, and in doing so creates a weaker story. Take the True Knot, these supposedly terrifying psychic soul-sucking beings. In the book, they kill maybe 2 important characters in 600 pages. They're about as threatening as a book club with anger management issues. Flanagan? He said absolutely not. In the director's cut, the True Knot actually lives up to their reputation. Crow Daddy is more active and aggressive and murders Abra's father. Snakebite Andy, her powers are magnified, and he gives her these abilities to psychically manipulate Billy Freeman into suicide. When characters we care about start dying, suddenly the threat feels genuine. The movie takes a darker, more violent approach with most of the True Knot, whereas the book presents them as just more restrained. But here's where Flanagan really showed his genius. He understood that some fathers don't deserve redemption, even posthumously. King tries to rehabilitate Jack Torrance through supernatural intervention. It's King's way of saying, see, Jack wasn't really evil. He was just corrupted. It's therapy disguised as horror, and it doesn't really work. The director's cut takes a more psychologically honest approach. When Dan encounters his father's spirit, it's about acknowledgement rather than redemption. Jack was capable of love and abuse. The film doesn't excuse his behavior, but allows Dan to process having a father who is both a protector and a predator. The pacing improvements alone justifies the adaptation's existence. King often writes like he gets paid by the word. The book, it meanders through Danny's recovery with verbose introspection that would absolutely kill momentum on screen. Flanagan cuts through the excess while preserving the emotional core. And then we get to the ending. King's climactic battle takes place at a campground. After all of that buildup about the Overlook Hotel, we get s'mores and ghost stories. Flanagan understood that sometimes you need to honor the iconography. The Overlook isn't just a location. It's a character and a symbol of generational trauma. Bringing Dan back there, it creates narrative symmetry the book's ending just cannot match. Clive Barker adapted his own The Hellbound Heart and proved something most authors are too chicken shit to admit. Sometimes you need to butcher your own work to save it. The Hellbound Heart feels like a rough draft. It's got brilliant bones, but it reads like Barker had this incredible premise and hadn't really figured out how to make it work. In the novella, Pinhead is barely mentioned, and might also be female. The franchise's most iconic villain is basically a background extra in his own origin story. And the character relationships, they're even worse. Kirsty isn't Larry's daughter protecting her father. She's Rory's friend with unrequited romantic feelings. It's a love triangle in a story about interdimensional torture demons.
I thought I'd gone to the limits. I hadn't. The Cenobites gave me an experience beyond the limits. Pain and pleasure, indivisible.
Barker, the director, looked at Barker, the writer's work and said, "This isn't good enough." He made Kirsty Larry's daughter instead of some jealous friend. Suddenly you've got actual stakes. Family horror, it just hits different than romantic drama. Second brilliant decision, he turned Pinhead from a minor Cenobite into the philosophical center of the entire mythology. Doug Bradley's Pinhead doesn't just inflict pain. He makes suffering sound like enlightenment.
We have such sights to show you.
That's mythology being born in real time. The practical effects do what pros simply can't. Bob Keane's work still makes people queasy 35 years later. The resurrection, the Cenobites' modification, Frank literally tearing off his own skin. These are images that burrow into your brain permanently. The book describes these things, but the description is just foreplay. The film also fixes the book's complete lack of pacing. The book introduces the Cenobites immediately, blowing its biggest reveal from the start. The film understands that mystery is power, and by the time Pinhead shows up, we're primed for maximum impact. Julia's character development improves dramatically. In the book, she's just another adulteress. Claire Higgins creates something far more complex. She's a repressed housewife discovering that murder turns her on more than mundane marriage. You watch her transform from horrified accomplice into eager participant. Even the puzzle box becomes more than a plot device. Barker turns it into this beautiful, terrifying artifact that promises transcendence and delivers torture. Hideo Nakata's Ringu succeeded by doing something most adaptations are too polite to do. They looked at Koji Suzuki's protagonist and said, "This guy's a rapist piece of shit. We're changing everything." Koji Suzuki's Ring, it really isn't horror. It's more of a police procedural masquerading as supernatural terror, written by someone who thinks sexual assault is character development. Ryuji is a self-proclaimed rapist who brags about committing sexual assault like he's discussing the weather. The book presents this information and expects readers to root for this guy. Or, I guess maybe root isn't the best word for it, but it never feels like he's condemned the way that he should be. But somehow, it gets worse. Suzuki describes Sadako as intersex in ways that feels exploitative rather than meaningful. It's not scary, it's just, I don't know, it's fucking offensive. The director performed brilliant adaptation surgery. He kept the core concept, the cursed videotape that kills you in 7 days, and then threw out everything that didn't serve the idea. His first smart move was gender swapping the protagonist Toriko Asakawa, a divorced television reporter and mother. Suddenly you've got actual emotional stakes. We now have a mother trying to save herself and her son. That maternal protection instinct elevates every scene from procedural investigation to visceral terror. He then transformed rapist Ryuji into just Ryuku's stoic ex-husband. He's still mysterious and troubled, but not a criminal. This version, he brings expertise and emotional weight without making audiences feel complicit in celebrating a predator. And here's where Nakata really showed his genius. That iconic scene where Sadako crawls out of the television screen, it doesn't exist in the book at all. In Suzuki's novel, victims just die of heart attacks. That's it. Nakata, he took the mundane concept and created one of the most viscerally terrifying sequences in cinema history. Watching Sadako emerge from the TV, her movements wrong and inhuman, that's what was missing from the novel. The film's atmosphere does what the book's procedural approach completely misses. Nakata creates oppressive dread where something sinister feels constantly present. The cursed videotape becomes genuinely disturbing in visual form because it feels like watching something that could actually kill you. The gender swap wasn't about political correctness. It was about recognizing that maternal fear and tapping into the primal emotions that transcend cultural boundaries. You can have Japanese audiences or American audiences. Everybody understands this. Nakata didn't preserve Suzuki's vision, but he evolved it into something that actually functions as horror. It's going to sound harsh, but Friedkin's original created the template for possession horror while Blatty's novel just existed. See, there's a difference between being good and being legendary. The book is solid, and the audiobook is even better. It's a thoughtful exploration of faith, doubt, and evil. But the film is a cultural phenomenon that traumatized an entire generation and continues to do so. When people are literally fainting in theaters and when audiences have to be carried out on stretchers, that's telling. The novel approaches possession as a medical mystery with supernatural implications. Blatty maintains careful ambiguity about whether Reagan she's truly possessed or suffering from psychological disorder. It's intellectually rigorous and completely wrong for the story. Horror can certainly work through ambiguity. I'm not arguing it can't. But it felt wrong in the novel. The movie's horror comes from the certainty that something terrible is happening, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Friedkin understood this is the path to take, and the film shows us supernatural events directly, and then focuses laser-like on growing dread. Dick Smith's practical effects transformed Linda Blair into something genuinely horrifying. You can describe a 12-year-old's head spinning 360 degrees, but until you see it happen, until you watch this child's face contorting into something inhuman, it's just information on a page. The sound design alone elevates the film beyond its source. Mike Oldfield's piano melody creates corrupted innocence that mirrors Reagan's transformation perfectly. And it was used strategically, only 3 times throughout the film. So when you hear those notes, your subconscious knows something terrible is coming. The film manages to transcend a really good book. It takes Blatty's intellectual approach and transforms it into a visceral experience that works on multiple levels simultaneously. John Carpenter took Campbell's Whose Goes There and did what every great adapter does. He asked, how can I make this better? Then he went on to school the golden age of sci-fi on how horror actually works. See, John W. Campbell wrote like an engineer describing a technical challenge rather than an artist creating psychological terror. He had brilliant concepts, but they were all wrapped in workmanlike prose that treated paranoia like a puzzle. Campbell's original features nearly 40 people in the Antarctic Research Station. 40. Try keeping track of that many characters while building paranoia. By the time you figure out who's who, the story's over. Carpenter cut it to 12 people, and suddenly every potential infection matters because you know these characters. You've seen McReady play chess with a computer and then pour whiskey into the circuitry when he loses. When any of these people might be a thing wearing their face, the stakes become more personal instead of statistical. Rob Botton's practical effects transform Campbell's abstract descriptions into visceral nightmares. The novella describes the thing's transformations in typical Golden Age prose. They're functional and informative, but ultimately limited. Botten shows you what that actually looks like, and it's horrifying. Watching something burst out of a man's torso, bite off someone's arms, and then scuttle away on spider legs made from his severed head, that's imagery that stays with you for decades. The man worked himself into exhaustion creating these transformations, and it shows because they're all brilliantly done. Carpenter also made crucial tactical changes. Campbell as his characters kill things with electricity, which, again, is functional, but visually boring. Carpenter gives them flamethrowers, and then suddenly you've got Kurt Russell stalking through quarters like some post-apocalyptic angel of purification. But the film's masterstroke? It's the ambiguous ending where McReady and Childs sit in mutual suspicion as they slowly freeze to death. Campbell's novella ends with clear human victory. Problems get solved, heroes win, and order gets restored. Kurt Russell wrote that final scene, and it's perfect. Instead of victory, we get two exhausted men who can't trust each other. They can't prove their humanity. And they might both freeze before it matters. That ending has sparked decades of debate. The beauty is that it doesn't matter. The paranoia has become total, and trust is an impossibility. It's horror at its most sophisticated, using our desire for certainty against us. Peter Benchley's Jaws, it's bad. Not mediocre, bad. Steven Spielberg took this literary chum and created the greatest creature feature ever made. And growing up in Jersey, reading Jaws felt like some kind of weird rite of passage. I remember one summer bringing it to Cape May, reading it on the beach, and then being petrified about a great white coming into 6 inches of water and dragging my fat ass into the ocean. And this is going to sound ridiculous, but the thought scared me so much, I was afraid of going into our pool. It's not even like it was a massive pool. The premise is primal and perfect. An apex predator invades a safe beach community during tourist season. Benchley understood that sharks represent nature's indifference to human civilization. The concept is brilliant. Everything else, though, is trash. Every single character is unlikable. Brody's a violent hothead with zero everyman charm. Hooper's a condescending rich prick who sleeps with Brody's wife because apparently this story about primal terror needed adultery drama. And Quint, just straight up cruel and unpleasant. You're literally rooting for the shark. But wait, it gets worse. Benchley decided his shark story needed 2 major subplots that have fuck all to do with sharks. First, Ellen Brody's affair with Hooper turns the final act into jealous rage where Brody tries to strangle the marine biologist supposed to help kill the shark. Then we have Mayor Vaughn's connection to organized crime. Benchley took a concept that should have been Moby Dick with teeth and turned it into The Sopranos with fins. The ending? The shark just dies from its wounds. After hundreds of pages building up to this unstoppable force, it basically just bleeds out. Hooper dies in the cage, Quint gets dragged down, and Brody's left floating with no cathartic resolution. Then Steven Spielberg saw the skeleton of a masterpiece buried under soap opera bullshit. There are a few things he changed that really show his brilliance at play. The first is he made Brody a New York transplant afraid of the water. Suddenly you have a relatable everyman instead of an angry cop with anger management issues. Roy Schneider's Brody becomes this ordinary guy forced to confront his deepest fear. Second, he cut the affair subplot entirely. Instead of jealousy and attempted murder, the final act becomes about 3 different men bonding over their shared mission. That scene where they compare scars aboard the Orca, that doesn't happen in the book. And then finally, we have the explosive ending. Smile, you son of a bitch. Followed by the most satisfying shark destruction in cinema history. Spielberg understood that after following the trauma this shark inflicted, we'd need a release. And then John Williams' score does more to create dread than Benchley's entire novel. Those 2 notes, the ones you can hear in your head, they became the universal language of approaching danger. That's the music that makes you afraid of bathtubs. The mechanical shark's frequent breakdowns forced Spielberg to create suspense through suggestion rather than explicit gore. Less became more, and the result was infinitely more terrifying. The cultural impact speaks for itself. The novel was a bestseller, but it's primarily remembered as source material. The movie created the modern summer blockbuster, and it still terrifies new generations. And it proves that sometimes a bad book contains a great movie.
Thank you.